Radio Free Skaro!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Radio Free Skaro, episode number 948. I'm Steven at Gallifrey One.
Lauren at Gallifrey One.
And Chris at Gallifrey One.
This is our very tired wrap-up
As per usual.
episode.
Yeah.
These have been varying levels of energy over the years.
I think this is not as bad as some in terms of energy.
I recall, I think there was one year when I think the two of you had already gone or were asleep on the Monday morning.
Really?
And I literally got up, recorded the outro, and then
yeah, okay, that makes sense.
popped in the hotel area. Yeah, and
The only solo one we've ever done is when you guys were stuck in an airport somewhere.
in Minneapolis,
Yeah.
I had to stay overnight in an airport.
And we were
But that was
at
just
work
a trip.
or something.
Yeah,
I
that
don't
was
remember
just
what
a
it
trip. I think knowing the energy levels of us at the time, I probably would have just said, this is the episode. Here are the interviews. Bye. That was pretty much going to be it. And that's all this might be too. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll find out.
We'll find out. We'll see what magic happens.
The joys of not planning.
Unscripted 948 episodes of unscripted Doctor Who podcast.
Every
drivel,
minute
I
of
think is the
gold.
word you're looking for.
Yeah, exactly. What's this?
Yeah, every minute of a gold.
Of gold. I thought you said I have a cold. I don't have a cold. I have been yelling myself hoarse
I witnessed this.
every night.
Yes,
Yes.
Last night was on the dance floor. Warren was there for a little bit.
I was.
You're a bit more of a teetotaler this trip.
Not by choice, although I am drinking a real human beer right now. But,
Yeah,
but I do have a lot of non-alcoholic beer in my room because I have blood pressure concerns.
Well done.
But as I said to friends, I walked around on Saturday. I'm like, I'm not hungover and depressed. What's wrong?
Well, I've been doing more drinking for both of us, Warren. I want you to know that.
Good
Yes,
on
I
you.
can
What a
confirm
champion.
this, yes.
I just because it's like the last time was 365 days ago at the previous Gallifrey one that I bust loose and have some fun. So I sound worse than I feel, but I am somewhat tired, as I imagine all of us
yeah.
are.
Even despite teetotaling,
Well,
I'm still tired.
yeah.
I know for both of us, it was a reasonably late night last night.
Yeah.
Very
so-
late.
Yeah.
It's very
and
very
then
late.
Up
Yeah,
early.
1:30 for me. So
Up early this morning.
1:30. My God.
I know I'm an
1:30.
amateur.
Yeah. I should, before we continue this riveting banter, I should say that we've got 3 interviews of varying lengths in this podcast. The first is Shaun Lyon, short little chat with him about something we'll talk about Gallifrey One. After that, Simon Guerrier, who's had an amazing looking panel directly opposite our live show about archive television, which is right up my alley. And so I wanted to get him on to talk about that. So that's also there. And then, even though it wasn't recorded at Gallifrey one half of us was in LA at the time of the interview. And that's Peter Harness. You know, Peter Harness, our old friend from Doctor Who. Well, he has gone and made himself a TV series for Apple TV Plus called Constellation, which premieres on February 21st.
As alluded to in the live show.
As
a
alluded
couple
to,
days ago.
yeah, Shaun Dingwall is in Constellation. You heard a little preview of it there. So I sat down with Peter a couple weeks ago and talked to him about that when he was in LA doing press stuff. So very exciting times. So banter resuming. What today? I think the only thing that we each saw panels.
Yeah.
Chris and I
Yes.
were
A panel,
both at
Yes.
Verity in defense of.
Yep.
Even though Verity has been less frequent with the episodes, very popular panel.
What was the room capacity? 170 or something like that.
was a lot.
It was
full.
pretty close to full, yeah.
Pretty close to full. Yep.
And fun as ever.
Yep.
Bar one little glitch, I suppose. But
But
if you know, you know.
he was dealt with
If you know, you know.
expertly.
But yeah, fun as ever. There's one question presented of so the whole premise is like a position statement is made, an opinion of sorts, and then you have to defend it, and it's meant to be something a little
indefensible, usually.
Indefensible, really, unpopular opinion sort of thing.
The Cryons are great, or something like that.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
Defend
one
the
of them
Cryons
today
minute.
was the Vervoids are the greatest monster of all time.
Yeah.
But there's one about how there have been too many Scottish doctors,
and that's actually a true statement. But yes,
one of the participants at the time is a Scottish gentleman.
Yeah.
And then Liz was sat right beside him, and
Sanjay, and then Liz.
And the reaction from both of them was priceless.
It was great. Well done by Kat. Kat is the one who selects the topics.
Oh yeah, she rings it out the wazoo.
Exactly. And so when there was a Scottish person on there, and of course Liz is there too. Perfect. Topic choices.
Top tier trolling.
It was great. The whole thing was
you would
top
be
tier
impressed,
trolling.
Warren.
As a fellow trollist, yes.
Yeah. I feel
I've been
like
trolling all weekend on my t-shirts.
I know. Yeah. So you got a Golden Girls one on.
It's
here.
not really a troll, but I did tell my gay friends I was appropriating their culture.
Well,
so.
I was looking at it, like I'm looking for the joke in there, and there's no.
The joke is
just,
a dork like me is wearing a Golden Girls
that's
t-shirt.
Golden Girls.
Trolling myself, I guess. I don't know.
That's true.
Yes, you are now older, I believe, than any of them were at the time.
Yeah.
Golden Girls was filmed. Or
Well,
at least,
that's just great.
At least maybe a Stell Getty or something.
No.
but
Stell Getty was 48.
She was one of the younger ones.
The youngest.
Yeah, she just looked older. Yeah.
Beatrice B. Arthur there is actually 36 years old in the first season of.
Really?
No,
of course not.
No, I'm
No,
trolling.
she was
Now
40.
I'm trolling you.
Yes. Well,
She was
that's per usual.
And once again, you've fallen for it.
Of course I have.
I looked
For
directly
some-
at you.
For some insane reason, I trust you. I don't know why.
Why is that, Warren?
I know, despite all the proof that you're a terrible human being.
You know, Warren, after 948 episodes, sometimes I do feel like I am your bully.
Well, whatever made you think that?
I don't see.
Oh wait,
I
it'll be
know.
all the proof.
This is it will be submissible in court.
Yes, and expect to see you there.
Exactly. To quote,
There will be no episode 1000. That will be your court affidavit.
To quote Peter Capaldi in an episode of The Thick of It, don't you ever call me a bully. I am so much worse.
Wow, I'm glad you're taking solace in this.
Absolutely.
Solace? I don't know.
Yeah.
And said with a smile.
Yeah, exactly. Not like Peter Capaldi,
Warren,
though.
Warren, what did you see today?
I saw, besides Stephen being a right beep, Days of Yore, the BBC of the 70s and 80s, was moderated by Keith Barnfather, and it featured Brian Coucher, he who was Travis, Kevin John Davies of Hitchhiker's fame, Fraser Hines, I think we all know him, and Matthew Hot Waterhouse of Pad.
You almost said Matthew Hot Waterhouse, and I love that.
Hot Waterhouse, I didn't mean to, but he of the Adric parish, and it was all about their reminiscences and mostly complaining about working in the 70s and 80s at the BBC. One of the best parts was when Matthew Waterhouse said, and this is well known amongst Brits, that the legend in the building of TV Centre is that it was circular to confuse all the drunks, more or less. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the general gist of it.
So the executives then.
Yeah.
Everybody. And also, like, you could always watch actors be confused. Nobody could find anything because it was circular, and it looked great on paper, was basically the sort of the guiding principle of the thing, but it confused everyone working there.
Wow. It's funny you mention that because about the drinking culture in TV in those days, because we didn't mention it on the interview, but Simon Guerrier was talking to me last night about how a book by Alvin Rakoff, which he does reference, mentions that he even goes so far as to describe the smell of Lime Grove Studios, which of course is where Doctor Who was made in 1963. And it stunk so much there of cabbage for some reason in the canteen that nobody ate in the canteen, and instead they just all went to the bar for lunch and dinner. And this is perhaps why the drinking culture of BBC TV production in the 60s and 70s sprung from, because Lime Grove stunk.
They said the rehearsal space, which is near Big Finish's current place, and there's like a set of condos called the rehearsal space or something similar.
Yeah, the Acton Hilton is what it's called.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there was a pub right next to it, which everybody agreed was a terrible idea.
Right.
Because they would all get drunk and then rehearse, and nothing got done.
Yeah.
They also talked about the usual strike stuff where people had to huddle at 9 p.m. in order to get things done for 10, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
It wasn't all a litany of complaining. But it was generally about working at that time. Matthew Waterhouse was very new, and he started as an intern before anything else.
Wow.
I can't remember, it wasn't Lime Grove, it was somewhere else. Maybe it was Lime Grove, but he was like around sports people working on that kind of stuff as a PA essentially. And he's like, I don't care about sports, so it drove him crazy.
Right.
Like, and that's kind of why
A kindred spirit for you.
Yeah, I know.
I
Like,
don't know
this
if
is saying
that's
a lot here.
specifically why I went to acting, but it certainly didn't hurt. So.
Right. Did they talk about cameras or tape canisters?
Yes, they actually did. They were talking about how with shooting you couldn't go over a cable, so you had to plan everything out to just the right way if you're going from scene to scene. You had to make sure that you plotted to not hit those, which meant the actors' moves were circumspect as well, because they couldn't force the camera to move over there, right? So it was, as we said before, it was a ballet of movement. Yeah.
With Derek Jacobi.
Exactly.
Just to mention the fact that we interviewed Sir Derek Jacobi on the weekend. Yeah. Which is cool.
Oh, one more fun story is Kevin John Davies was on set of Destiny of the Daleks as a fan, and the Davros unit, the wheelchair unit, was not being occupied by Davros at the time. So he went over and checked it. The other two fans were like, "Oh, don't do it." So he started flicking switches, and it turned out he flicked a switch that was meant to keep a fan to blow smoke out after an explosion scene, but it blew smoke in. So they had to do it over again. He got written up. He got told off by some woman who was worked for the BBC. And they became steadfast friends long afterwards, he said. But at the time, he was very intimidated by her, and he got banned from coming. Fans generally got banned from coming to. They also talked about the gallery being closed off, and Matthew Waterhouse said during Earthshock, some fan came up to JNT afterwards, like, "Oh, these new Cybermen look great," and he was just like, because somebody had forgotten to block off that one gallery, and they got in. So
man, fans on set,
the worst,
only the worst,
absolutely the worst,
yeah.
They do a lot better job now.
They do a better job of it.
They shoot them on site.
There's just like automated laser turrets.
Exactly. Yes.
They're
called Shupanskis.
In Wolf Studios.
bullying turret weapons.
Yeah, exactly.
Much worse.
Let's. So we alluded to it last episode at the end about how there's going to be a Shootigatwa video right before the Tyler panel. What we didn't know is that it was also accompanying a bunch of posters that fans could take home. We got some posters ourselves.
We did, yep.
And then this morning, Sunday morning, as we record this, Disney Plus tweets out that
and the
photo,
BBC did
and
too.
the BBC did too as well.
Yep.
So basically, Disney Plus began their big launch of and it's going to be a big launch, let me tell you, at Gallifrey One, which is
pretty
astounding.
cool. I mean, we know there was Disney representation here last year.
Yeah.
And I was told, or had heard whatever, that somebody from Disney Plus was here to record the fan reaction to shoot his video.
Yeah.
Which was intense.
Yep.
Yeah.
It was very intense.
And just before I forget, and to give him his due, Andrew Mark Thompson did his own little variation of the poster, which is great.
I want to order that as a poster. I really do.
That'd be funny. Yeah.
But I mean, Galley is obviously a big deal in general, and having that recognition from Disney Plus is really cool.
It's very cool.
No matter what you think of Disney's involvement.
I know, we always, kind of joke or just kind of assume about how the Doctor Who world kind of stops for a weekend and everything kind of happens here. We think, they're still making the show abroad and everything else. But you know what? Everyone who makes Doctor Who knows that this is where the hub of fandom and creativity is every weekend.
They let Disney Plus know that.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to see the video yesterday. You did, Stephen.
I did.
I did see some people on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, kind of zaprudeering it somewhat, given Shooty was in his first shooting block costume.
Right.
But says he's filming the second series.
Well,
so they're kind of trying to figure out, timing and when it might have been made.
Instead of us debating about it, how about we have a quick listen to what Shaun Lyon has to say about that video and about Gallifrey One in general. Here's Shaun Lyon right now. It's Sunday afternoon at Gallifrey One, so let's see where both of our energy levels are at. I'm with Shaun Lyon, Program Director of Gallifrey One. How you doing, Shaun?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Stephen.
How has your convention been?
It's been a crazy weekend, but we've had a really good time. Derek Jacobi is as great as everybody can think. Alex Kingston and Billy Piper had a wonderful time, and yeah, it's going great.
The big thing, of course, was at 5 o'clock on Saturday, and will be repeated again in the closing ceremonies today. Everyone is building up for this big video message from Ncuti Gatwa, officially sponsored by Disney Plus. Tell us about how that all came about.
Yeah, so we've always, as I said yesterday, we've always had a really good relationship with people at the BBC, and people like Chris Chibnall and Stephen Moffat, going back to Phil Segal in the TV movie. And a few years ago, we actually had we developed a relationship with some people at BBC Licensing who were actually here before the pandemic. And then she, out of the blue in December, put me in touch with the publicity people at Disney Plus. And so we started emailing back and forth and had a couple of meetings. And what we ended up with was terrific. It was a 45-second greeting from Ncuti that was filmed on the set last Monday. And these promotional posters that they just released the artwork publicly, but we were able to do it last night and give these posters to everybody. It was great.
Yeah. Like, that is a pro shot video. No offense to all the other contributions, like shot on their phone and stuff, which are all great and everything, but there was like Disney Plus branding on it. Like, this felt like Gallifrey One just came like even closer to like official in a way of Doctor Who. I know you're a fan around convention and all that, but you know.
Yeah, not quite, but but they've been great to work with. They actually, like I said, they filmed it last Monday. They sent it over, I believe, Tuesday, and they were editing it and making sure that it was ready for prime time. We actually had a couple of ladies from Disney Plus social media branding here yesterday in the audience. One was on our tech table and one was in the back of the room shooting some video of the audience reaction, which is really what they wanted. I got to tell you, Disney Plus, the people there are really, really keen about promoting and publicizing it. This is the launch of their publicity campaign for the first season with Ncuti, and you're guaranteed you're going to see a lot more. I've heard a couple of things, and there's going to be a lot more promotion on this.
Yeah, so, and then this is what Russell said too, is that the Christmas specials and stuff would sort of be like kind of a soft launch, but then it's Ncuti's first season. Did you expect like this to be basically, because I tweeted about the picture that's on the poster this morning on Sunday, did you expect the public launch to be this weekend as well?
I didn't. I'm thrilled that it actually happened like that. I woke up this morning to see that Disney Plus had tweeted out the art with the poster. But yeah, I think they were really kind of testing the market here, for the last couple of days. But I think they realized that this is definitely the time to do it. They can build up a couple of months and have a big launch when it launches in May.
Not that I want to put the bow on this year, but next year's coming up, 35th one. Tell us a little bit about that, if there's anything to reveal.
Well, it's Gallifrey One in 35mm is our title, and we'll be here at the Marriott LAX. I think it's the 12th to 14th February of next year. We don't have any guests to announce yet, but we will have a doctor next year. I can guarantee you that. We're not at the Doctor convention. We're a Doctor Who convention, which is a TV show, but we will have a Doctor Who next year. We've already got about 4 or 5 guests that we're going to not announce anytime soon, but during the summer. And our tickets will go on sale in April.
Are you looking forward to a brief time off before planning that one?
Oh, God, yes. Gonna go home and relax for at least a couple of days, but no, we usually we'll sell our tickets and we'll do our hotel stuff, and then I take the summer off and we'll start ramping up in the fall.
Right. And watch the Dodgers and stuff like that.
And watch the Dodgers, absolutely. That's my passion.
Shaun, you've been great to us, and you've been great to me today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaun. Very interesting stuff. Very exciting, obviously, for the future of Gallifrey One next year, being the 35th version of it. But yeah, the video was shot just this past week. I know that people were like, as you were saying, Chris, trying to like determine, wait a minute, Ncuti Gat was wearing his
two jukeboxes in the back, like squint.
But his costumes are hanging up on a rack. They probably thought, which one? Well, let's put that one on. It's right. Yeah. I don't think it's as locked in as all that. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible he had something else on and they didn't want that costume to get revealed. So
possibly. Yeah.
Here you go. Here's the older one that everyone already knows.
The Speedo costume confirmed.
I know you didn't see the video at time of recording. We're literally 25 minutes away from it being played again at the beginning of the closing ceremonies. But he does say in the video that he just shot his first ever scene in a quarry. So it's a big moment.
And it was
That is
very
important.
cold, apparently.
Yeah, apparently cold. So I love that, the script that he was reading was very targeted towards Doctor Who fans. It felt kind of nice. So yeah, exciting times, Disney Plus, Ncuti Gatwa, addressing the people at Gallifrey One. It was pretty cool. So, well, up next, a couple of interviews. Lastly, it's Peter Harness, as I said, all about Constellation. It's on video. If you're watching this on YouTube, it's actually the one bit of video we did because it was 3 weeks ago, and therefore it was easier to do.
Accidentally snuck out on YouTube
A little
as
bit,
well.
yeah. Thanks for that. But up next is a good old-fashioned, old-timey television talk with our good friend at this convention, Simon Guerrier. Well, this is now becoming an annual segment on this podcast, which is called Simon Guerrier Does a Very Interesting Panel at Gallifrey One, but it's directly opposite the live show that we do, so I completely miss it and have to ask him later to tell me what it was all about. Hello, Simon.
Hello, Stephen. It's so lovely to be back. And this time you've not interviewed me straight after a panel where I was totally adrenalized. And you asked me one question and I then spoke at high speed for about 3 hours. So I will try not to do that this time.
That's fine. That was fine. It was about David Whittaker, I think, and you basically summarized your whole book, which I bought anyway, even though I already have it all on tape. But what was your panel about that I missed and I really wanted to go to?
So this year I did a panel called Television Before the TARDIS. Right. And what it was inspired by was The Giggle, which begins with John Logie Baird doing his experiment with Stooky Bill. And I read up a bit on Stooky Bill because I'm a nerd, and I was like, okay, I'm going to look at Wikipedia on that. Right. And what I was thinking was, how do you get from Stooky Bill to Bi-Generation and big special effects and Doctor Who? There's a kind of, where did television go? And that was making me think, when Doctor Who began in 1963, how revolutionary would it have appeared to people who watched it for the first time? Was it in keeping with where television was? Was it a bit ahead? All of those kind of things. So what I was looking at was what was on in the same slot before that. Right. In that tea time slot on Saturday evenings. Oh, there's an adventure serial. Oh, the adventure serial, Gary Halliday, about the adventures of a airline pilot, and each serial he goes to a different country and there's baddies and stuff. David Whittaker wrote one of those serials and worked on another one. Douglas Camfield met his wife on Gary Halliday. So it's the same people working on these things. So, there's 50 episodes were made over 3 years. Mm-hmm. One of them survives. And I can't, okay, how similar is this to Doctor Who? Oh, it's completely different. It's terrible. and what got a laugh in the talk is that it begins with a recap. It's episode 3, and it begins with a recap that goes on, and it's like slide captions of all the characters, explaining who they all are, and it's really convoluted. And it just, and you're like, oh, so when they did Doctor Who, the first thing they do is they go, just keep it a bit simpler. Right. And that's why the first 3 serials of Doctor Who, I think, each begin with just the 4 regulars. Because it keeps it focused and you can follow what the plot is and things. So all of those things, once I got into that, I was like, this is really interesting. And then, because I'm a hardcore nerd, I was like, well, how far does this go back? So, so I started with the first night of television on the 2nd of November 1936. Right. And the first drama that was on, so the BBC had experimented with television, and they'd done experimental broadcasts and stuff, and they had done drama as amongst those experimental broadcasts. But when they began their daily television service on the 2nd of November 1936, what's generally regarded as the first broadcast drama is at the end of that week. So they started on Monday, and on Friday they broadcast a 20-minute excerpt of a stage play which was done in Alexandra Palace TV studio. And there's a photo of it, and amongst the cast was a 24-year-old actor called John Bailey, who's then in the Sensorites, the evil of the Daleks and the Horns of Nimon. And I was like, oh, now I've got something, because that's a direct connection to the earliest days of television to the modern day. What has what would he have done in that's changed? And you start going, okay, the cameras couldn't move. The photo that survives says it's a play without scenery, only props, because the studio wouldn't have picked it up.
Right.
And then also, so Stooky Bill, the reason that Logie Baird needed a doll was at the time in 1925 that he was doing television, he had a 30-line system, of 30-line resolution. So the press reports at the time go, so you could do the letter A, and you could recognise the letter A, and you could recognise a face if it was made up well enough, and if the light was on it a lot, but the light was so hot that it was uncomfortable to be in front of. By the time TV began in 1936, he had what he referred to as high-definition television or high-resolution television, which was 240 lines.
Astounding.
Yeah. So he had high-resolution television at 240 lines. To be able to pick out a face, you had to exaggerate the features. So any lines you wanted to be able to see, like cheekbones or the mouth, you painted bright green. And anything you wanted to hide or take down, you painted red. And so they're pictures of the people made up in this way. And it's weird as hell.
Right.
And very soon after this, within a couple of months or so, the BBC had kind of gone, we're going to abandon John Logie Baird's system and go for the Marconi system, which was 405 line. And that remained the system for television until The Enemy of the World, which was the first one made for 625 lines, which was all in preparation for going to colour. So basically, within a couple of months of BBC starting in 36, you're using the technology that was still being used when Doctor Who began. So what you would have seen and how you do storytelling was possible. But you start seeing things like they're doing, everything is based on books or stage plays, and they're excerpts. They start doing original bits and pieces, but it's all very basic. So the first originally written for television thing is a 10-minute murder mystery. And the guy who wrote 10 minutes, and the guy who wrote it is asked about this. And it was all broadcast live, so there's no recordings, there's no whatever. But the guy who wrote it said, so it had to have 3 characters. No, so 3 characters, no scenery, the cameras couldn't move, and that meant the characters couldn't move more than 3 feet because they'd be out of shot.
So the cameras are actually stationary, like they couldn't obviously not truck around. Could it even pan left or right or anything?
No, very basic. It's very, very basic. Also, they couldn't cut between things. It took 8 seconds to change from one camera to another.
Oh my word.
So if you could work that into the story, you could make that work. But it meant there was very little cutting. So effectively, it's a still frame. So what they tended to do, which is what you see quite a lot of, is that they would put on, most of television was sort of variety shows and dance shows or talks. And because the frame was very limited and the space was very limited, to show scale, what you did was you put in a multiracial, multicultural cast. So the first night of television was very short as well. So the first week, it was on between 3 and 4 in the afternoon, and then between 9 and 10 in the evening. 2 hours a day. And on the first day, that first hour was half an hour of speeches that all the press reports go, that was really dull. And then a variety show, and the variety show had Adele Dixon, the musical star, singing a specially composed song called Television. And then Buck and Bubbles, who are black comedian pianists, and they do music and they do comedy. And then a Chinese act of plate spinning. And that multicultural, multiracial thing is to kind of put richness into the frame, if you see what I mean. And I think that's what's carrying on in Gary Halliday in the 50s, which is each serial is set in a different country. And then when Doctor Who begins, it's set in South America, it's set in Mexico, it's set in Beijing, and you can see the through line of that thinking because they're limited in their sets. And then what they're driving to by the end of the first year is to go, go out and do location filming and increase the scale and the scope of the frame.
Right.
And once you start getting into that, you start watching Doctor Who in a completely different way. You kind of go, this is a legacy of, and what they're pushing are things that television has been trying to push the format on for ages.
Gary Halliday, right? That's what the show is?
Yeah, so Gary Halliday, 1959 to 1962. And they when Doctor Who was delayed in 1963 in development, they repeated some Gary Halliday in the same slot. So it was the same show, basically, except that Sidney Newman, by the time Sidney Newman joins the BBC in 1963, Gary Halliday has kind of run out of steam. Mainly because the big draw was the guy who played the villain, the voice, who's the villain in most of the serials. And they did novelizations of Gary Halliday. He's the guy on the cover.
Right.
You know? And he died during production of the 8th serial. And you kind of go, well, that's it then, isn't it? Right. And also, Sidney Newman came in a few months after this, and they were going, we want something in the same slot. But rather than doing 50 episodes over 3 years, and you get one 6-part serial, and then a few months later you get another one, we'll make them consecutive, and we'll do 50 episodes over a year. And Sidney Newman went, well, if we're doing that, I want to do sci-fi. And his views, and I think that's because sci-fi and telly was the medium of the future, and it's technology. So sci-fi was kind of linked to that. But as I say, Gary Halliday was full of people who then went on to work on Doctor Who. So it's a direct continuity, you know. And I think you can see them kind of going, well, what didn't work on Gary Halliday? We can correct that. So it's less silly. So the Gary Halliday is all rather, everybody who's a good character is rather posh and speaks like this, and do you mind? And everybody else has an accent of some sort. Right. And they're terrible foreigners and stuff. And Doctor Who dials that down a great deal. So rather than Ian and Barbara being at a posh school, they're at a completely ordinary secondary modern. So it's much more relatable. It's much more, you know, that school could be anywhere in the country. Right. Rather than them being an elite British Airways pilot and his adventures. Yeah. And all of those kind of things are going on.
I'd never heard of this show before today, essentially. So, like, why has the show never been mentioned in books and other things about the origins of Doctor Who before now?
Well, it does get mentioned. But what gets mentioned is, you know, David Whittaker's credits included, you know, because it appears on IMDb and stuff. And it does get mentioned on bits and pieces, but not a lot. But I didn't know. So on Wikipedia, it says this series was based on the books by Justin Blake. No, it was a TV series, and they novelised the stories. And they did the first 5 serials were novelised. The last one, which is based on a serial by David Whittaker, was novelised after Doctor Who in an Adventure with Daleks. So it came out in 1965. And I haven't been able to track down a copy of it, but I really want to see what the copyright page says and if there's a biography of him and what the hell is going on there. So you know, yes, I didn't know anything about it, and then I was like, oh, this is interesting. And my wife said, no, it isn't. Stop talking to me about it. Why don't you go to LA and tell those people they might share your strange interest?
And now you're sharing them with me and the listeners of this podcast.
Yeah, and you know, there's me and there's you, and I don't think anybody else cares. But, or at least that was and I was kind of like, I'm coming to Galla Fray in America, you know, for the listeners who are not aware, going to talk about really obscure, missing television from Britain in the 1950s and before that even I hadn't heard about when I started. Who is going to care? And actually, the fact that it's really obscure and weird and quite funny seems to have been the thing.
Well, what will you do for an encore then next year if you're coming back to Gallifrey One? What other obscure television series that perhaps inspired the way Doctor Who was made can you find then, perhaps?
Oh, well, you know, there's all sorts of things. So Christopher Barry and Waris Hussein, before they came on to Doctor Who, were working on the soap opera Compact. Yeah. So I looked at the surviving episodes of Compact and went, oh, I can see things that are going on here. Like, so episode 2 of Compact. So the big thing for me with Compact was it made me realise how lucky we are. They made 373 episodes of Compact, shown twice a week, between 1962 and 1965. 4 episodes survive. That would be, a thing. That could be the situation we're in. Episode 2 survives, and episode 2 begins with a panning shot closing in on a reception desk. Yeah. And the word Compact just appears over the top of it. So no title sequence, no whatever. And there's a receptionist answering 2 phones at once. And she's played by Justine Lord, who I know because she's the girl who was deaf in The Prisoner.
That's why her name sounds familiar to me, right? Yeah.
An ex-girlfriend of David Whittaker's, it turns out.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so she's on the phone answering 2 questions, so you get the sense that it's busy.
Yeah.
And as she's on the thing, the camera pans around and people are coming through the door, and it's a studio set, but behind the door is a flat that looks like outside, so you get a sense of outside. And 3 people come in quick succession, and she's on the phone and she's talking to them and whatever. And so what those conversations do is bring you up to speed with everything in the plot. And she also goes, and we've just had our first issue of our magazine published, and shows it. And you go, in those 56 seconds, you get everything you need to know to take you forward. So there's not what Gary Halliday had, which is this really long sequence of photos and whatever to explain the plot. And that kind of thinking, that's what Doctor Who does as well. So that Doctor Who doesn't need recaps in that first year, you can just pick it up. So if you missed the first episode of the Daleks, you can watch the second episode. Yeah. All of those kind of things. And that's directed by Christopher Barry. And it's the same. The credits look like the credits on Doctor Who. It's the same typeface.
Like Justified and all that. Yeah.
Exactly. And then at the end, it's a roller caption, and then at the end, it's the fading things. Yeah. But it's Alan Bromley, who's the producer, who later directed The Time Warrior and
Nightmare of Eden.
Exactly, Nightmare of Eden, and directed by Christopher Barry. And Waris Hussein was doing Compact immediately before he did Doctor Who. So you go, so all of those kind of things are feeding into what Doctor Who is. Right. And I find that absolutely fascinating. Yeah. But part of the thing is that because of the way that we tend to look at the history of Doctor Who, whether that's in the DWM archives or on DVDs, we do it story by story. So you just look at the making of a particular story. Once you start getting into the context of outside of Doctor Who, that can be very informative of what Doctor Who is. So the kind of thing that my talk was I'm going to suggest a whole load of things that I now see in the first year of Doctor Who.
Well, I mean, I recently watched Quatermass and the Pit for the first time ever to talk to Toby Haydock about his book that was coming out. I bought the Blu-ray and all that. And it, 1959, right, was the third one?
So Quatermass and the Pit, so Quatermass Experiments, the first one, is
55, right?
is 53.
53, sorry.
Quatermass 2 is 55, because it's a spoiler for ITV. Right. There's this new upstart thing. Yeah. And Quatermass and the Pit is the Christmas of 58, 59. Yeah. And I would recommend to your listeners, if you have any interest in what I'm talking about, get the DVD of those sets, because you can see how television drama changes in those 3 serials. Because they're very similar in tone, but look at what technologically they are able to do.
Yeah, I mean, they're all done live, but like the recaps, this is what got me, the recaps for each episode of the Quatermass of the Pit, I thought some of them were like 3 or 4 minutes long to sum up the previous one. And was that just the style of television at the time, or was that Gary Halliday that was doing that?
I think that's the style of television. Yeah. And it's like you're getting a chapter of a book. That's the kind of thing they're thinking about. So a recap is how you do it. What you start to get in this period is, rather than making things that are adaptations, you start to get things that are made specially for television. And Quatermass is one of the earliest examples of this. And it's then the BBC go, because Nigel Neal was a staff writer, the BBC thinks they own the copyright. So they sell it and it becomes a movie. Right. And what you have is, rather than TV drawing from these other media, now TV is the originator of things that people go off and adapt. And you get movies, you get novelizations, so television then becomes a book. Right. And you go, television starts to be the one that's leading the dance, basically. And that is, this is all happening at the same time. So 1957, as I'm sure your listeners know, the way the BBC is paid for is that to receive BBC stuff, you need to pay a license.
Yeah.
In 1922, that was a radio license. From the late 30s, you could also buy a more expensive radio and TV license. 1957 is the last year where more radio-only licenses are sold than radio and TV. After that, more people have television than just have radio. 1957 Christmas Day is also the day that the Queen addresses the nation on television. For 20 years they've been doing it on radio. Yep. This is the first time they do it on television as well. And so all of these things are showing television becoming the preeminent form. Yeah. And as that's happening, you're getting them going, let's do stuff that's television and is written for television especially, rather than adapted. Yeah. All of that is going on at the same time. I find that fascinating. Yeah.
It's an evolution. It's sometimes I think as Doctor Who fans, we try to look for like the one moment, like March 26, 1963, the board meeting that there, Doctor Who was born. It didn't exist before then. It's built up through several years, and then it results in Doctor Who essentially.
And there's a whole load of different things. So what I haven't talked about is that Sidney Newman came from ITV, and before that, you know, he came from this place called Canada.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. And why was he the guy that the BBC wanted to poach? Because he went, I don't want to do adaptations of stuff. Yeah. I want to do stuff specially written for television that we own, because that's a marketable product. If we've got it, we can then sell it on. Yeah. But also, I want it to be about the people who are watching television. So I want it to be more working class and more everyday. And because of Canada having time zones, they are on telerecording much before the BBC, because the BBC doesn't need to do it. So the BBC tries a bit of telerecording. They try recording the first 2 episodes of Quatermass and then go, oh, this isn't good enough quality. Right. We'll stop. For God's sake. You know, that just,
Oh, I know.
But in Canada, they do that and they telerecord it. And then they go, oh, we've got a thing we can sell to the US. Right. So we get more money for the same productions. And then they sell a job lot of these dramas to the BBC, and from September 1956, it's called Canadian Television Theatre, is a monthly strand. It starts with the BBC broadcasting Flight into Danger, and then every month there's another one for the next 18 months. And at the end of each one, or in the middle, I think, with the credits, supervising producer Sidney Newman. So people in the BBC and ITV are going, he's the guy. He's the preeminent guy of television. Right. So the BBC invite him over to England in August 1957 to basically sound him out about coming to work for them. Yeah. Because at that point, ITV has started and 72% of the audience share is ITV, and the BBC are losing the game, and they're like, we need this guy to come in and whatever. So they take him to the head of drama at the time was a guy called Michael Barry, and Michael Barry took Newman to see John Gielgud in Twelfth Night at Stratford-on-Avon. Right. And to the Royal Court in London, which was the edgier place, to see Look Back in Anger, which was the new medium of theatre. Alvin Rakoff, Jacqueline Hill's husband, who was a TV director at the time, he says in his amazing book, which I recommend to all your listeners, I'm Just the Guy Who Says Action, which is his diary of him making a drama in Studio D in Lime Grove, that's Sean Connery's big break. Right. Because Jacqueline Hill said he'd look great in just his pants.
Wow. Right.
Yeah. Very good book. It tells you what Lime Grove smelt like. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. But Alvin says he was offered a job at the Royal Court based on his television work, and if he'd taken that job, he would have worked on Look Back in Anger. So the Royal Court was trying to do on stage what television had been doing, because what television had been doing was they realised that if you're in somebody's house, like the TV set is in somebody's house, you have this intimate medium, and then it's all about the close-up. So you can do close-up and you can see people's expressions and they're changing. So you can dial down the level of the acting because you're not projecting to the back of the theatre. So you get this much more intimate, powerful television. Yeah. And Alvin says it's sometimes claimed that Look Back in Anger influenced theatre and styles of drama. And he says, no, it's television that influenced these. The kind of television that Sidney Newman was pioneering and that BBC was trying to get in on, that changed how you did theatre. Anyway, before the BBC can actually make Sidney Newman a formal offer, ITV goes, do you fancy coming and working for us? And so he does. Yeah. And he became head of drama at ABC, which was one of the ITV networks. And he did the Sunday night drama there, which was very much in the style of what he'd been doing in Canada. It was called Armchair Theatre. It was all original plays, all about working people, ordinary people. But he also had cottoned onto this thing that was a big thing, that one-off plays got less of an audience than continuing series because the audience connected with characters. So if you could have a classic example of this is there was a police inspector in Liverpool, and when he retired, he sold bits of his memoirs to the BBC, and they did one-off plays about real police work, and it was a bit more gritty than Dixon of Dock Green. And the BBC kind of went, this has worked really well, and we've done like 4 of them. The bit that worked really well was these 4 one-off plays had a few characters who were the same between each ones. Why don't we do a run of The Adventures of a Police Station? Zcast. A massive hit, massive hit. And you talk to the people who work in drama, like Irene Shubik, who like Verity Lambert, was one of the people who worked for Sidney Newman at ABC. And she said, well, it was like a Pavlovian response, that you built up an audience. So you get things like Sidney Newman going, right, well, we'll do our own police show, and that's The Avengers. And The Avengers is quite fun and silly, and yet I showed a clip of going, look how sophisticated the camera work is. There's a bit where Patrick McNee is talking, but what you're watching is Ian Hendry, who doesn't say a word, but his face and his responses to what Patrick McNee's saying is what tells the story and stuff. And you go, this is amazing stuff. Compare that to the rather stagey Gary Halliday and whatever, and you go, right, what they've done with Doctor Who is they've gone adventure serial like Gary Halliday, but will bring in the sort of lo-fi acting style and the sophistication of the camera work to tell the story. And that's what Sidney Newman is bringing to it. And so it's this mesh of things. And as I say, once I was onto this, I was like, oh, okay, and they've done this, and they've brought in here, and then there's Sidney was also doing a sci-fi series for kids on ABC, and very confusingly has multiple titles. So the first serial is called Target Luna, and then it's Pathfinders in Space, and then it's Pathfinders to Venus, and each of those serials has its own episode titles. So it's all very confusing. What is this? And they correct that with Doctor Who by going, it has one title and it's easy to follow. But there's a scientific, like an academic study of one of the episodes where they show it to a bunch of kids and assess their responses. And Sidney Newman hands this report to, when he's at the BBC, he hands this report to Hugh Green, the Director General of the BBC. He sends it to Donald Baverstock, to various other bigwigs. Verity Lambert says in Doctor Who the early years, that report was really useful because it gave me, I didn't have children of my own, so it gave me some insights. But what that report actually says is, this programme is dreadful. And the kids, and I showed a clip, and they're absolutely right, it is laughably bad. But that is why Sidney Newman thought Bug-Eyed Monsters was a bad idea, because the report basically goes, don't do them, they always look dreadful. And the episode that they studied is about Earth people who arrive on a sort of deserty planet at Venus, and they meet cave people type people, and there are monsters and things. And you go, it's not a million miles from the Tribe of Gum storyline, but in tone it's completely different. And that's what they get from that study. But effectively that study is, don't do it like this. And they don't. And they learn from that. But that's why Sidney Newman is so horrified by the idea of the Daleks, because he's going, that is exactly the wrong way to do it. So all of these things.
Yeah. You should write another book about stuff like this, Simon.
Yeah, maybe I should. Or, I don't know. You'd buy it, but would anybody else?
I would. Just like I bought your David Whittaker book, which is I'm very much looking forward to reading when I get home from this convention. How's that been going for you? Amazing.
It's had a huge response. It's very odd, because I spent 6 years writing it, most of it all in my head. It's still all in my head. Like I have this enormous spreadsheet in my brain. And it's quite odd to talk to people who have read it and go, oh, I'm now sharing this man. My wife still refers to me as the third Mrs. Whittaker. But it's lovely, and the response has been great. We sold loads of copies, and it's really nice.
Yeah. Well, you see, there is a market for a deep dive archive television like this, and this is why I always have you on the podcast to talk about it, Simon. So thank you.
Oh, well, right-minded people, your listeners. It's very gratifying, and and you've been very kind. I have heard bits of Radio Free Skaro, but I get told off because I'm listening to it while I'm doing the washing up.
Right.
And you say something nice about me, and my wife is like, "What? What are you listening to?" So vain.
Yes.
I didn't know.
Simon Guerrier is terrible. There, how's that?
Much better.
Yeah, he's not. You're wonderful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Constellation is a new 8-part series coming to Apple TV Plus on February 21st. It stars Noomi Rapace as an astronaut who returns to Earth after a disaster in space, only to discover that key pieces of her life seem to be missing. And the creator and writer of Constellation, friend of the show and Doctor Who writing alum, Peter Harness, joins me now from rainy Los Angeles. Hello, Peter.
Good afternoon, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing well. I know it's been rainy in LA today, which is probably not what you were expecting or were hoping for when you went there for the whole press tour for Constellation. But I hope you're coping.
I'm managing. Whatever it is, it's not minus 15 and full of rain, full of ice and snow like it is in Sweden, and there's still daylight. And it's Los Angeles, which is quite exciting.
That's true. Just like the cheese platter that you have in front of you.
Indeed.
so by explaining that at the very beginning, you are now free to nibble on said cheese throughout the course of the interview.
Thank you. I'm full. Okay.
without any repercussions or anything. So
it's skillfully done. Thank you.
You bet. Absolutely. Constellation, Apple TV Plus. I know you've done. Obviously, you've written for Doctor Who, and you've written for other established franchises, and you've done adaptations of other things. But this is like your first fully fledged original creation. And for a prestigious distributor like Apple TV Plus, no less. How did this whole thing come about?
I kind of decided probably around when I was kind of doing the final Doctor Who's that I did, that the way that the industry works nowadays is that basically nearly everything is based on IP. It's based on books or a comic book series, or it's a remake of something. And that's always been the case to an extent, but that's not really why I got into doing it in the first place. I wanted to tell stories that I wanted to tell, and I guess I just had a bit of a mid-career wobble / epiphany, and I thought, well, there's no point being a writer for me unless you're struggling to tell your original stories. So I just decided that I was going to kind of get an original series over the line if it killed me, which, but it might. Damn well near did, but I decided that it's been fun doing adaptations, and it was fun doing Doctor Who. But I would really love to be writing my own stuff. So that was a fair few years ago, and it's been a long journey. But I think it's ended up very much in the right place, and very much with the right team and with the right people. And I have to say I'm extremely happy with it.
Mm-hmm. Did the pandemic affect anything in regards to like was it like a deciding effect, like were you thinking, well, if did it give you time to consider your career and thinking this is what I really need to do it, or was it actually crystallized before that and the pandemic just sort of got in the way of the momentum of everything?
It was crystallized before the pandemic, and really this was getting near to happening during the pandemic. And I guess it held it back by by however long it took for things to get up and running again. So we started shooting in the beginning of 2022, early 2022, and shot really for nearly a year, and did the post after that. So the pandemic just added a year or so to however long it took to come out. But Apple were already on board, and we already kind of had our lead director, Michelle McLaren, by that time. But it's a big old project, and it's 8 hours, and I wrote all 8, and it's many kind of different locations. We shot in northern Finland for above the Arctic Circle in very snowy weather, and in Morocco, which doubles for Baikonur in Kazakhstan, where they bring the they launch the rockets and bring them back down again, and of course at the International Space Station, which we built a replica of in Babelsberg Studios in Berlin, an extremely kind of accurate and faithful reproduction of it by Andy Nicholson, who's our production designer, who also worked on Gravity. And we shot a lot in 0G, which is time-consuming and challenging.
Actual zero, not like the Vomit Comet or anything like that, but
no, not the Vomit Comet, but we built a whole. It was our stunt and our VFX coordinator, Martin Gerst. He essentially kind of designed a whole new system of flying people in wireworks and a whole construction for the roof of the studio to enable our actors to travel around the set. And we did all sorts of things, but it was very challenging and difficult to shoot. But I think it really works when it hits the screen. Yes, so it's been a big beast.
Yeah. What is the I mean, it's you make it sound like, oh, I'm just going to create an original series and then you do it. But like, what is the process of doing that? You have an idea, you spark an idea, but then you have to sell it and pitch it. I assume. Like, what is the whole process when involved with this?
Well, this I kind of the producers. There's an English, a UK production company called Turbine Studios, headed by David Tanner and Tracy Schofield, who produced Small Axe, Steve McQueen's kind of big series a couple of years ago, and a French production company called Hohe Core, who, amongst other things, produced The Returned, which was a kind of really good, horror genre series from a few years ago. And they asked me whether I'd like to write something about astronauts, basically, and kind of what, the experience of astronauts returning to Earth. And that I thought that would really suit me very well. And it kind of collides with an awful lot of things that I'm interested in. I'm very interested in the actual nuts and bolts of space travel and the history of space travel and what has happened in the various different space programs and where it's at now. And I'm also interested in what you might call the hidden history of it, the kind of psychological, almost supernatural side of it. I'm very interested in a thing called the overview effect, which is what happens when you leave the Earth's atmosphere and you look down on everything you've ever known, hovering there below you, like the only pocket of life that we know of in the whole universe, and how it feels to be separate from that. And historically, that has a big effect on astronauts. They come back. And some of them have gone through a kind of profound spiritual and emotional shift within that, and they come back believing, with newfound faith in religion or a different kind of religion, or they think, like William Shatner coming back the other year just said, I thought it was going to be wonderful, but it just filled me with grief and the most overwhelming sense of despair I've ever had. And in any case, whatever happens to people who've been into space, they come back changed. It has a radical effect on them, and I think that that's really interesting. And in kind of researching that and thinking more about it, I knew that there were conspiracy theories about whether we landed on the moon or not, which I think are kind of nonsense. Mm-hmm. But there are like ghost stories from up there. There are stories of people hearing dogs barking and Russian cosmonauts seeing ghosts or angels hovering outside of the capsule, and then then relief crew joining, and the relief crew seeing exactly the same thing, and people hearing disembodied voices and things like that. So I guess I kind of wanted to do something which was fairly heavy on the authenticity of the sci-fi, but with a supernatural element in it as well. And that kind of coincided with something that happened to me when I was on holiday once in Sweden, where I live, in the forests of Sweden, and I was staying in a log cabin, which the series kind of starts in that environment, and I heard there was a little girl in the forests at nighttime calling out for her mama, mm-hmm. and we never really found out where this little girl was, or indeed whether she existed. But every night at dusk, we would hear this kind of disembodied child's voice going, "Mama," from out in the forest. And so that stuck in my head for some reason. And when I was writing the story about a mother, a female astronaut stuck up there, essentially trying to get back to her daughter after an accident on the ISS, I kind of thought, it feels as though her daughter is wandering the forests, also calling for her. And so that kind of collision was what, finding out how those two stories, coincided with one another was what, was the starting point of the series for me. And lots of other things have fallen into step alongside it. But it's basically a story about a parent looking for a child and the child looking for a parent, and it takes place against this backdrop of what it's like to come back home from space.
Mm-hmm. And so, did you have to? Was Apple TV the first and best home for this? Like, were you seeking out other distributors for it? And Apple TV kind of has a recent history of sort of like for All Mankind and Foundation. They're sort of like tying their mass to sort of this kind of programming.
Well, I guess it was fairly early on in their life as a broadcaster. So when we joined them, they hadn't had. I think maybe For All Mankind had come out, but they were in the process of like developing their slate of things, which now keeps on being added to, and it does seem that they've got something of a following for sci-fi, and they seem to do sci-fi very well, and. Mm-hmm. But I don't know whether that's whether that's by design or whether that just seems to be something that as they've kind of gone on and commissioned more and more things, it seems to work quite well for them. I guess we had to, because it's it's a costly kind of big scale series, so. We had to come out here to try and to America to find somebody with who'd be able to support it. And Apple, I think, really loved the idea from the get-go, and they've been a really good home for it.
Mm-hmm.
And extremely supportive.
Yeah. Did you have an idea of like the scale that you wanted to tell with the story? You mentioned like the various international locations and everything else. And did that curtail your thoughts, or were they pretty much met from the time of gestation until it was completed?
I mean, I think I just decided I'm going to write what I want to write and see if I'd have been. Really, if I'd have been highly realistic about it, and said to myself, write something that you think is a slam dunk for getting commissioned, this wouldn't have been it. Asking somebody to support a kind of unproven concept in this way, which is clearly has high ambitions. That's probably not a hugely sensible idea if you want to actually get it made. But like I said, it that's how I wrote it, and it did just fall into line. And I certainly don't feel there's been no compromise in the vision of it from when it started to now it's finished. And the challenge has been kind of, matching the scale of what we wanted to do with it, with the anybody's capacity to do that. Because it's not only have we had to find new ways of doing zero gravity, we've also kind of had to really push the envelope effects wise.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's been a challenge for a lot of people, but we've got a very, very kind of good team with an awful lot of wonderful things on their CVs, and I think they've looked at it and felt that this is kind of something I can really sink my teeth into, and it's a challenge, and it's something a bit different for everybody.
Mm-hmm. The Starting We Were Past is from Sweden. You shot in Finland and Berlin, and it's taken off from Kazakhstan in the story. Perhaps you would think of your standard space series. Good. I'm glad you took a bite of cheese, because this was the intention of me asking a longer question. Is that it would be set on like the US, like NASA or something, or the UK Space Agency, but this seems very much close to home for you in a way, in that you live in Sweden, and it's kind of like a more of a European setting as opposed to an American or a UK setting.
I guess so, but for the lead character in it was always going to be Swedish, because she was looking for this Swedish girl in the forest, and mm-hmm. I think, actually, the character is married to an English person, so the family is kind of half Swedish, half English. I guess it was the ISS which dictated that, and the ISS is it's jointly owned by the US and ESA, the European Space Agency, Roscosmos, who are the Russians, and Canada and Japan. Mm-hmm. So it's by its nature a very international setup, and it's the only space station which is in orbit currently. So it naturally felt like a very international production, and we filmed a lot of it in Germany because Cologne is where the headquarters of the European Space Agency are. But we've got American characters, and parts of it, although we didn't shoot them in America, are set in America, and so it's not kind of a and none of it's shot in the UK. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of it's multinational rather than kind of necessary European, although we have got a lot of European actors and locations in it, obviously. But it's got a strong American flavor as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're the creator and writer of all this. How much say did you have in the casting and putting together this large ensemble cast that you put together?
Well, we were really lucky in that once the lead character is called Jo. Obviously, she's a Swedish astronaut. She has to be tough and resilient enough to do that job. But she's over the course of the series, she's like pushed really to her boundaries emotionally and in terms of the things that she's losing and her relationships with her family. And I mean, really, I think it was probably only Noomi Rapace who could have played that part, and she was certainly top of my list. And as soon as we sent her the scripts, she said yes immediately. And I think she was kind of pissed off because she had been intending to take like 6 or 9 months off. She just finished filming something, and then but then she felt she really had to do Constellation because I think she felt it had been written for her, and it was a part she was born to play, and I agree with her. And it was similar with Jonathan Banks as well, aka Mike from Breaking Bad. He's definitely one of my favorite actors. Our lead director, Michelle McLaren, she's Canadian originally, but has lived and worked in Los Angeles for many years, and she's worked an awful lot on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, and so she knows Jonathan from back then. And we discussed him for this part of a retired astronaut. Very briefly. Everybody thought, well, if we could get him, that would be wonderful. And she rang him up and said, I'm going to send you some scripts. I think have a read and see what you think. And he said yes the next day as well. So actually really getting both of our leads was fairly straightforward. But we do have the part of Joe's daughter is who's a kind of 9-year-old, 10-year-old girl called Alice, was a little bit more challenging, but because that part bears a lot of the emotional weight of the series. And if you can't kind of get the right child actor for that part, then the whole House of Cards collapses a little bit. But we've got an absolutely kind of stellar pair of twins, Davina and Rosie Coleman, to play that part. And I think that that when people watch it, you'll see that they're brilliant actors, not only for kids but for adults, and they really do carry everything they need to carry. And I think we were absolutely blessed to get those two as well.
You also, I mean, you wrote all 8 episodes, at least credited anyway. But you had help. You had help from people who in the Doctor Who universe would be familiar with, like Rob Shearman and Emily Cook and Lindsay Alford. How did you gather this little cabal of writers to sort of guide you through this process?
Well, I mean, at about the same time as I had my little epiphany of wanting to write things, write original things, I also kind of, I also decided that to try and just in general do it in a different way, because it's quite a lonely job writing. You're for the most part you're stuck by yourself inside your own head, kind of arguing with yourself, and usually getting kind of completely fed up with yourself and having to leave the room in order to get away from yourself. And it's quite, having done that for like 10 or 15 years or whatever, I wanted to find ways of just opening it up a little bit more and being able to bounce ideas off people more. And I think in general, that's how I want to do things in future. And the way that it's worked on this basically is that I've got a little team of people, and Rob, Shim, and Emily Cook, and Lindsay Alford, and my wife Rania, and essentially I kind of like, if I'm writing it full time, I'll get up in the morning, I'll write 10 or 15 pages maybe for a couple of days, and then I'll send it to these guys, and I'll say, what do you think? What do you think of the direction of it? And they'll just kind of help me through that and be a sounding board, which is really, I mean, it's a bit kind of like exposing, I suppose, to kind of share things with people like that at an early stage. But I find just by kind of getting people's initial reaction to it, and being able to explain myself to them, and riff off other people, it really kind of supercharges the process. And I'm trying to find a way in future of kind of trying to scale that in some way, so it's possible to do that on more projects. It's a really interesting way of doing it. It's opening it up a little bit more, and kicking it around with people in the early stages. I think it's really good, and they're a fantastic team of people to spend time with. I mean, Rob's got a huge and bonkers imagination, and Lindsay, who was a script editor on Doctor Who for many years, the script executive, she's extremely good at kind of structure and working out how things might stack up, and Emily kind of now works along, she works with me in my production company as the kind of development executive, and my wife, I work with her all the time. So it really kind of helps me not be on my own doing it, and it keeps my head above water, and it keeps on generating ideas as it goes.
This might not be specific to Constellation, but I'm always intrigued about how writers will structure a story if they know how it's going to be broadcast or distributed. Like if you're writing a show that's all 8 episodes or something are going to drop on Netflix, knowing that there's, the next episode button is 2 seconds after the first credit and you're on to the next episode, you might be wasting a drop dead cliffhanger. And so perhaps do you alter your script in that way? I mean, the first 3 episodes are dropping on Apple TV Plus, and then it's weekly after that. Did knowledge of how it was going to be played out, does that actually impact how you write a show, or you just write episodes as you want to sort of have them play out regardless of how people are going to be watching them?
Well, I think firstly, we didn't know that was necessarily how it was going to be. We didn't know whether it was going to be dropped all at once, or the first 2 and then 1 a week, or anything like that. So, but I mean, really, even if the kind of next episode button is there, you want people to stick around and not treat the end of the episode as a convenient point to kind of go to bed, or say, well, let's not bother with it anymore. So no, I mean, I've tried to end on a big switch or a big cliffhanger for every episode, regardless of where it is in the series. And I've also tried to give every episode a bit of a different feel, and kind of twist the twisty thing a little bit more in every episode, because regardless of whether you're asking them to come back next week or you're asking them to come back in 10 seconds, you're always asking them to come back. So I don't feel it can kind of let up in that, or it can't let the tension drop until you're so invested in the characters that you might stick around for the characters rather than the story. But I'm a really big believer in pushing ahead with the story. Having as little kind of extra fat on it as possible. I want to charge ahead and get the story told. So it's cliffhangers all the way.
Mm-hmm.
For me.
Well, Constellation took you about at least, I want to say 6 or 7 years, judging by the timeline that you've laid out to from the first idea to the broadcast. Did you learn anything from your sort of first major solo production that you created? Anything for perhaps future productions that you might want to start out from the ground?
Yeah, I mean, God, it's been. I can't tell you what a learning experience it's been. I mean, I've always been desperate to do this. I've been desperate to kind of be in charge of my own show and something on this kind of level. But it's a very all-consuming job, No, I mean, obviously I've written it all, but I've kind of showrun it, and that is the amounts of kind of presentness and being involved in stuffness that takes from you, and kind of stuff that you're not across the board, from kind of financial and budgets and logistical planning to dealing with actors and dealing with networks and as well as all of the kind of creative stuff and people asking questions of you all the time and being very available. It's exhilarating, and I found it exhilarating. I found it a lot of fun, but it takes a lot out of you. But having said that, it's been a complete kind of crash course in how to make a series like a kind of big sci-fi series on this scale, and that's there aren't many of those series around really to be doing that on, and however it kind of transpires in the future, that's an experience and skills and a kind of awareness of how to get it done, which I'll be able to take with me forever. I mean, it's been absolutely exhausting, but it's really so kind of exhilarating and enjoyable as well at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all get to enjoy the exhilaration starting February 21st. Constellation first 3 episodes drop on Apple TV Plus. Peter Harness, best of luck with that, and I'm sure we will all enjoy it.
Can't wait to see what people make of it. It's a crazy ride, and I can't wait to see what everyone makes of it.
Excellent, Peter Harness. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
There you are. That is another Gallifrey One in the books. Our 15th. The podcast's 15th. I know you're 14 because of the missing year.
We're 14, yeah.
15
We have a 7B.
years.
We have a 7B of Gallifrey ones.
6B, I think is what
whatever.
you mean. Yeah, but yep. 15 years of doing podcast at this convention.
Madness.
It is utter madness.
All began on somewhat of a whim to come.
It did.
As well.
Yeah, it really did.
Back in the day.
It did indeed. Next week, we're all back in our proper times and places and catching up on all the news that we've already missed and that will be happening in the week to come. So rest assured, all the banter that you tune in for every single week will be there in spades next week on Radio Free Skaro. So until next time, I'm Steven at Gallifrey One.
Warren at Gallifrey One.
And Chris at Gallifrey One.
So long for now.